Actually, before we get started, I just need to double check that something bad didn't happen. Hold on.
I love how casually he says that. I just have to check that something bad hasn't happened. Welcome to the Marketing Team of One podcast, where we have conversations about the issues one-person marketing teams face when trying to meet their goals with limited time and budgets. Now here's your hosts, Eric and Mike.
You look really disturbed. Why are you so sad?
Thanks for asking and noticing. I appreciate that.
Well, you came in physically weeping, so I care. What's going on?
Thank you, Mike. I'm reminded again of the pain and suffering that so many have gone through in this career, of sending a file, usually at a deadline. There's usually some sort of hair being pulled, tears being shed, and the final thing is send that email, send the file, and you're like, oh, I did it. This is it. I'm done.
Yep.
Off, grab a nice hot tea, maybe do some meditative, soul searching, and then you're repaired from the trauma that was maybe that project. Lo and behold, 7:00 at night, you get another email. That file wasn't the right one. I need a different file. Back to it. Back on the train. Yep.
So people are confused. You're picking up on some confusion about files in general.
Yeah, there's a lot of different ways we can save things.
Yeah,
we all know that.
Yep.
But they don't all work for the right situations.
Yeah.
So I think I'm just doing a little PSA podcast here. This episode will be about files.
Okay.
And I just want to help people kind of maybe help people understand a little bit more of the different types of files and how those can be helpful or maybe hurtful.
Hurtful files.
Well, a file you have to resend or doesn't work causes just a little bit of extra pain in that project. And it doesn't have to be
for people, the person who's dealing with it and the person who sent it to them.
Yep.
So it's like file ping pong.
File ping pong. Yeah, a little bit.
Yeah.
We're trying to reduce that.
Yeah.
Let's just do it one time. Everybody's got what they need. Boom. It's going to get printed or reproduced in a certain way. It's perfect.
Do you see that picking up a lot more lately now that digital mediums are so prevalent? Do you see that stuff that might be okay for a screen and then tried to be repurposed is not working, and is that a big culprit of it?
Yeah, and I think people need to have a little bit more of a deeper fundamental understanding of what some of these platforms can provide as far as art is concerned. And I think there's wonderful advances around Canva and some of those platforms, Figma. Those are great, opportunities for people a lot of different types of people who don't have the ability to maybe pay for Adobe or, just don't want to learn it because it's complicated. They can go into those platforms and produce art, and it passes inspection. Everybody loves it internally. It's great. Now we have to send it somewhere, and might not be what is going to work for that vendor.
What do you mean work? Like what makes a file not work for that vendor, let's say?
So there's a variety of different factors that come to play on that. And one is, of course, the file format. What kind of format did it deliver in? Was it a JPEG? Was it a TIFF? Was it a Illustrator file, an InDesign file, PDF? Yeah. Those are pretty common.
A Corel Draw file.
Wow. Oof, that's a blast from the past. That might still exist.
It does.
Wow.
Yeah.
That's one of those programs. Does Quark still exist?
Oh, that's a good question. I don't know.
Boy,
I'd love to see if it does, I'd love to see what that looks like now.
I cut my teeth on Quark and was quite the pro. But Yeah. So there's the file format.
Yep.
The next is the color space. How
Yeah.
is it being reproduced? Is it digitally? Then anything in RGB color space is great. But you have to understand if something is going to be printed, not digitally printed, by the way, but if something is going to be printed on a printing press or a silkscreen press, there's ink involved. And there's
Yes.
no RGB ink. There's only CMYK ink or spot color ink. Like
yeah, so spot colors are what ends up happening when, like, there's a lot of screen colors, those RGB colors that are like big, bold and vibrant and everything, right? And then you can't recreate that if you're going with the typical like CMYK colors, right? Because the screen is illuminated from behind, right? So like that's what allows some of that. But you can, that's if you wanted to recreate some of those colors, that's where some spot colors could come into play, right? Like those, like I'm thinking like a fluorescent ink of some sort, right?
Exactly.
You could use a fluorescent ink to try and make that work, but you can't just expect that your neon green thing in your Canva file that you sent to be digitally printed is going to come up neon green in the printout.
Yeah. So that color space thing it's a really, boy, we could spend hours talking about color space and the science behind it, and reflective as opposed to transmissive color. RGB is transmitted into your eyes. CMYK, you need to have a light source reflect off of it to see it. You know, there's whole programs in college around this. It's a complicated world, but the basics are, one is either you're projecting it on a screen and the other is you're printing it on something. So there's ink involved when you print something. That's the difference. Is really, let's think about it. Let's simplify it down to that. Like RGB colors can be very bright and very colorful. When you transmit that to printing it, it may not translate as effectively or be as bright and energetic.
So when you're talking about we're talking about this file ping pong that happens, right? Like, are you suggesting that you should know your destination when you're starting?
Absolutely. Yeah. Let's look at the final destination and work with, I would say, if print is involved in that equation in some way, let's say you're doing a social media campaign, but there's also a printed postcard that goes with that. Work on the postcard, get the photos looking great and everything working for that printed piece first, then translate that to digital.
Interesting.
And that's going to be a better way, because not only do you need to work with the different color space, the different format for however you're printing it, but you also need to think about it in terms of resolution. That's the third piece of that equation that you really got to pay attention to. And the resolution is something that when you're printing, you need to have very high resolution, because printing presses need, your eyes are looking at something that's being printed, and it needs to have very fine detail. And that fine detail in a photograph means a lot more pixels, which means you need to provide usually a pretty large file for whatever that photo is. So the size of the file is very indicative of how high a quality that file is. So that's why I say start with stuff that's going to go to print and then work your way into the digital space first. So you've got to work with pretty high resolution images, even at small sizes. It's pretty surprising how big some of those files can be. So
yeah, I mean, it's a pretty big red flag if you get an email sent to you with an attachment and you see that it's like 6K, right? If that's supposed to be a photo you're going to be using, you're in trouble right out of the gate, right?
Yeah, it's pretty. Think in terms of like when you're printing something, the resolution needs to have about 300 dots per inch at whatever size it's being printed. So 300 pixels per inch, that's a lot more. When you're on a screen, that's 72 pixels per inch. So it's very forgiving, I guess you could say.
But then you get into like
sizes.
We're finding more and more, especially like with, I mean, the displays that people have nowadays, especially their phone, they're so dense that they're a little bit less forgiving than they used to be too. Like that, and so size of the files matters. The data in the files matters, and you don't want to be stripping that out when you're sending it, especially when you're trying to print something.
I think the size of the files is a really good indicator, because there's a lot of different things at play. It shows how high a quality the imagery is in that file. You also, though, need to be wary that when you're sending files via email, if you're going back and forth with a client or something like that, those files really should be kept under 5 megabytes. I know that most emails now I just got one the other day that was like 75 megs, it was no big deal. But let's just assume for just, we can be pretty rest assured the industry standard is 5 megabytes. That size file should be able to go through an email pretty consistently on any.
So what if I've got you're telling me I have to have a high resolution file, and you're telling me that I have to squeeze it into a 5 meg box?
Who are you sending it to? If you're going back and forth with a client, I would say you need to save it out as a lower size file, and you can make it either smallest PDF size if you're making a PDF, or you just reduce the resolution if you're sending an image, and then just get them to approve it and move it through the system. But if you're sending it to print, that one might be you have to put it up on an FTP site or put it on a Google Drive and give them a link so they can download it. Because some of the files that we work with, I know, are in the multiple gigabytes. I mean, if you're talking,
what's FTP? I think that was all the rage a while before a lot of the cloud file services are, but they're not easy to use for anybody. Like they're not. It's kind of a weird, obscure thing. Now you can just upload your file to a browser and have it available and share that folder. It's way easier. Way easier to manage.
Yeah, a lot of the printers and the people that make the things that need to be printed, they have some sort of file repository system built into their sites usually that makes it easier. But when you're talking about things like big event graphics and like a photograph that's got to be 12 foot by 10 foot or something like that, that's a gigantic file. I mean, it's hundreds and hundreds of megs just for the picture, so it's hard because it's something that you kind of got to check before you send those emails. But for one, make sure that the emails that you're sending are not 2 gigabytes or something crazy like that. Sometimes it's easy to just, you get into the motion and you're like, click, drag, but put it over there. And then all of a sudden nobody got the email and, those kind of things. So it's a very difficult challenge to work around. But like I said, you could also take screenshots of things. If you need to get it to the client and have them approve something and sign off on it, that might be just the easiest way to do it. And share it that way.
I mean, there's a lot of great proofing tools out there online too, right? Like, so you're not swapping files back and forth where you can have things, Adobe has the Acrobat online, right? So where you can have everybody collaborating on, so you don't have everybody taking their own file and providing feedback on it and everything. So there are other options there too, right? Like
that's a pretty common one that works really well, is that Adobe. They allow you to take an Acrobat file and put it on there and have multiple people mark it up, and you can see all the progress on it, and that's really probably the only way to do larger projects.
Especially it's that single source of truth, right? But that's a diversion a little bit. I think we're just trying to make sure that when you're using files, like, you want to make sure that what I'm hearing from you is that you want to know what's its role right now, right? Like, so if you're sending something over email, you want to be a good email citizen too, right? You don't want to send something that's unnecessarily large if it doesn't warrant that, right? So like, that's where like creating some kind of PDF that somebody's going to be looking at or needs to, knowing that it's not a final thing, but it's facilitating quicker movements back and forth, right? Because it's not a huge file and it'll do.
Yep.
But you don't want to use that same file when you're sending it to the printer because it might not have all the details that'll have a better product at the end.
Right. Yeah, I think that it's important to understand the different types of files that need to go to print are probably, when you're working with a client and you're working in the development and the approval process, that's probably just going to be PDFs or JPEGs.
Yeah.
But ideally, it's probably a PDF because they can mark it up and make comments on it. And that seems to work the most easiest for everybody, or some sort of online platform for that. And if something is going to go to print, though, you need to understand that then that's a whole different world, and there's print production involved in that to take care of all those little extra details that you may not see on a digital product for whatever you're producing. Digital products are very forgiving, right? You said there's issues around resolution, I guess, right now, but most of the digital stuff that you put on, Instagram or something, if it's a social campaign or even a Google ad or Facebook ad. They're very tiny and very lightweight files, very easy to work with and very easy
almost
to
out of necessity. You don't like because of people's bandwidth concerns and stuff like that. You want to make sure that you have the files be as optimized as possible, especially web graphics and stuff like that.
But print, again, is a whole different world. And print can mean a lot of different things. I mean, I had a class in college that we always used to kind of chuckle at. The name of it was called Reproduction Techniques.
Yeah, get me and some friends around a table with some beers and talk about that class.
Talk about reproduction techniques?
Yep.
Yeah.
We didn't call it that, but that was a good way to describe the college experience.
Believe me, everybody signed up for that class.
I bet.
I mean, he had a waiting list.
What?
Yeah.
I don't see any models here. I don't see any not my models, not models, but dummies. I don't see any kind of no schematics.
People were pretty disappointed about 3 weeks in. They're like, I'm on here. That is a class where we learned a lot about, there's embroidery, there's varnish, there's printing with 4-color, there's printing with spot color. When you're working on projects that have large format, so event graphics, things like that, you've got packaging. That packaging requires all kinds of different specialized techniques, and when you're reproducing those packages over and over, they need die cutting, they need printing, they need varnishing, they need embossing, sometimes all kinds of crazy other techniques. So that's another file. You need to be wary when you're working in those kind of projects that stuff that goes to the printer or stuff that's like final that goes to print needs to be that's a much more different file than a PDF file or a JPEG or something like that. Like you would never send a PNG to print. You would never really send a JPEG to print. Those are just off limits. You're going to use file formats that are more like EPS files, AI files, InDesign files. You can use a PDF file if it's just a very simple project. You can print off of a PDF file. There is an actual setting that says press ready PDF that you can use when you're making the PDF.
And that's specifically if you're using InDesign for your layout, right?
Yes.
Okay.
I think you can do it in Illustrator too.
Okay.
But I don't see that. This is, we're deep into the Adobe suite of software at this point because it's a little bit more specialized work. And there's a lot more to do on that side of it as opposed to working in Canva or Figma or something like that, where you really don't have a lot of those options. Yeah. And you can print stuff out of Canva. I'm not saying you can never print anything out of Canva.
I want to get to that in a little bit because I think there's but walking through the steps, I think there's a lot of, you could wait till the end and check that you would have a pre-flight of checking that all these things are right. But pros won't do that. I'm in this space as a marketer where I'm not designing all the time. I can fake the funk. Right.
Nice.
So if I'm using Canva here and I'm hounding the person who's in charge of recruitment or something, and we want to do some recruitment fair or something, and I need them to send pictures of the last recruitment fair. And I want to put that together in some kind of printed sheet that we can distribute at a local college or something like that, right? Let's say you're that person who's they're using Canva, they're trying to collect a bunch of photos from people who have no idea what any of this is, right? Are there some things you look at right up front, like when they send it? Are there some red flags you look at for the files that you get?
It is surprising still to this day how many emails I get that are, and iPhones do great. I mean, Samsung, iPhone, the phone in your pocket can provide pretty much the quality you need for most things you're going to print, especially this kind of a scenario. You can print that photo up full size and still not worry about resolution or sharpness or things like that. Those are the things that degrade. But I think as a default, a lot of people, when they're emailing stuff or sending it, they always send the smallest size, and that will never work. I mean, you don't have the resolution. So I'm always first looking at resolution. Okay. I can change color schemes and color spaces as per needed, and the sensitivities on the print side of things are not as great as they used to be. The fidelity still isn't there to translate an RGB photo to CMYK perfectly. But it's not as painful as something that if you don't have the resolution. So if it's the wrong resolution, then we're out to lunch.
So basically, like this person that sent you the emails, they're probably on their phone. They took the pictures or something, and then I know on the iPhone, right? There's like when you try and send a photo, it's like, do you want to do small, medium, large, or original, right?
Yeah.
So you're saying like ideally you get that original size, right?
Original. Gotta
Every
go
time.
original. Yeah, it's just you're dumbing it down if you don't.
Yeah.
Maybe large, but
Yeah.
try it, you know, and that is file weight's heavy.
Are there things you can do if it's close? Like it's not quite big enough? Like
yeah, I think most of these platforms now offer some sort of AI solution that reses it up with varying degrees of success, depending, you know, especially if you're cropping in on a photo and you just want that one person who's down in the corner in a dark spot and there's not a lot of light. And
that's another reason why you want that biggest file possible, because like you might not want to use the whole thing. Like, you might have a whole, like, let's say it's a whole conference floor of people walking around and maybe that person's flipping off the camera. You definitely don't want them in there, right? You want to make sure that you've got the people. There's always one. But if you might want to zoom in on the people that are look like they're enjoying themselves, right? And so, but that if you're scaling that up, that's where that resolution comes into play too, right? You got to make sure that you have the highest quality thing. So you might have got a photo that seemed good if you were using it as it is, but if you've zoomed in and cropped and everything, you might not have enough of that resolution too, right?
Yeah, and ideally you have access to that original file. You took the original photo. The thing that also, speaking about resolution, that we run into consistently is that people are taking screenshots and then enlarging them.
Yeah.
Or they're shooting shots. They're trying to pull stuff off of maybe just some corner of a website or something like that and saying, well, for one, stealing it, you know, which you can't do. You have to get the rights to use photos and stuff like that. But then you want to make sure that you're not capturing the screenshot version of those things.
Yeah.
And that's a really hard thing. Even when you're doing a search online and find stuff that may or may not work, you really should be trying to source that photo some other place. Okay. And ideally, if it's for commercial use, you have to pay rights for that. You know, and so that's where like royalty or stock photos come in. But they're going to provide you with all the highest quality stuff there.
So let's say I've got to send you a bunch of photos, right? And there might be some context that's needed and everything like that. Could I like add them to a Word doc and then send you the Word doc?
Yeah, that's happened too, hasn't it? Yeah.
How do you get over that?
So I've had varying degrees of success with that. Most of the time it's not really great.
Yeah.
Because Word does its own processing and no, Word is not a design program and cannot provide really anything on the level of any sort of other design layout program. Yeah. It's a word processing.
Yep.
So it just throws everything into one column, basically, or two, of course, if you set up two.
And I think a lot of people, that's their killer app. They know how to use it. That's what's on their computer. Like it's PowerPoint, the best way to, it's the same thing, right? Like, and I think a lot of people use that as like a delivery mechanism, especially if they've got some other things going on. They want to add a photo and then maybe there's a caption that should go with that or instructions about how to use it. And I could see where they're coming from, like, especially if you got something that's multiple pages or something like that. Or like, hey, this should go here. Let's use this for this. But if they just deliver you that Word file, what I'm leading ahead a little bit, but you're basically saying they failed. They failed in their job.
Miserably, yes.
So while that Word doc is valuable,
yes,
because it's providing you context and additional information that maybe the image alone can't convey, would you suggest like sending the photos separately as well?
Well, yeah, and I think that's where it gets challenging because there's naming, let's say it's 150 photos. Like we work on some gigantic publications that have a lot of photos. And sometimes we'll get a photo dump from a client that is great, super helpful, but they might try to catalog it that way. And then we've lost what the name of the file is. And so that becomes a big burden as well. And so it's much better to try to create like a contact sheet. That's something that I know that might be a little bit challenging.
So you're talking about like having, let's say we've got 100 photos to kind of sort through, and all of those could be used. They're all decent photos. They're all high enough resolution, right? But like providing guidance about naming. You were mentioning something. What?
Well,
contact sheet?
it's hard to look at 100 photos.
Yeah.
Just like right out
Takes
of the box.
forever,
Yeah,
yeah.
it takes forever. You don't want to download them all. I mean, maybe you do, but you want to ideally look at them quickly somehow. So the delivery access to those photos is going to be on some sort of an online folder, maybe a Google Drive folder.
Yeah.
Some other product out there. So you're going to see it, and that might help, but a lot of times they crop the image and you can't see the full image, and it might not be specific to it. So we use something called a contact sheet, which comes from photography a million years ago, where you would just lay down a bunch of negatives on a sheet, expose it to light, and then you'd have one page that would have all of your photos on there to see it in one context. And you can still do that through Adobe Bridge is one of those tools that can do that. If you're familiar with using it, I'm not sure what other tools are out there, and that might be something that we might want to investigate. But it's hard to kind of just capture all the photos, organize them on one page, and then be able to look at them very quickly and review them and make sure that maybe you're not going to use all of them. So having some sort of a guide like that would be helpful. Maybe that's what that Word document could be, is just to see at all of the photos that are here. But you're not going to like go grab that photo out of the Word doc and use that in some sort of printed project.
Yeah. Oh gosh, that happens a lot.
Yeah, and that's I understand that there's a convenience factor that makes sense, but you really can't. You need that original quality, highest quality photo that you can get. And as I said, iPhones and everything in our pocket is at that resolution. You don't have to worry about it as long as it's not dumbed down and reduced in quality fidelity.
So we've been talking a lot about photos, right? Like, but what about things like your business logo and stuff? Have you seen things go sideways with logos?
Absolutely. All the time. Every day. It's terrible. No, I think the problem with logo files, and this gets into, again, where are we putting it? If it's going to be online, does it need to be transparent? Is it a JPEG? Then it's not transparent. If it needs to be transparent, then it's a PNG file. There's no other file option that you can use for that, I don't think. Most platforms, you can't upload a PDF and post that as a image file on a website or something like that. So those PNG files and JPEG files are really helpful for that kind of a purpose. Let's say you're, though, printing or you're embossing or you're embroidering a shirt. What's interesting about embroidery is that you don't need any of that stuff, because an embroidery process has to go through all they need is a picture, and it really can be a low resolution picture. So you can use that low res photo to have them map then the embroidery process to their machinery. So you can get away with anything when you're doing any sort of embroidery, but printing,
really? I assumed you had to. It would be better to have some kind of like vector type thing, something that's scales to any size when you've got limited colors and everything. So they don't even use that information.
Yeah, when you're doing embroidery, it's like they give you the 92 different colors of thread they have, and there's red and orange and silver and gray and black but that doesn't map to any sort of other color standard. So like when we're typically working on branding, we use spot colors or PMS colors or Pantone colors. And that is a consistent library that's a universal standard set by Pantone that establishes what that color actually is. So that red is this ink combination mixture.
Reflex blue is going to be reflex blue here on this printing, this thread, this, right? When they set up, it's the closest thing there is to a consistent color library.
Yeah, color standards universally, I guess. There's a multitude of different color standards, but the ones that are typically used in printing things is Pantone. Yeah. And that's where it gets also confusing, and we can kind of go down the two different channels of printing. You've got spot color and you've got process color.
Yep.
Most things that people see in a magazine are printed full color. Full color printing is process, where you're using 4 different inks. You're using cyan, magenta, yellow, and black. That's it, usually. Yep.
When you usually tell, right? Because if you get up really close, you can see all the little dots that are kind of offset.
That matrix.
And the matrix to see that, or take a magnifying glass to it or something like that. You can see that, that blue and yellow are coming together to make that green color.
So we've talked about 4-color process. That's all CMYK. That's how most things you see are printed.
Even most digital printing, right? Like when something's digitally printed, it's that 4-color process.
You'll still be able to see the dot printed by that digital printer.
Yeah.
And then there's like printing press printing, and that would include things that would also be 4-color process. But there's also specific colors that are defined by Pantone that you'll see used maybe in more packaging scenarios or higher level printing where maybe a brand color is really important. Maybe it's Coca-Cola Red or it's something like that where they don't really want to use 4 colors to mix together to make that one color. They actually just mix inks and build that solid 1-color ink as that color so that it's pure, and you get a lot better fidelity out of that single branded color or multiple. Sometimes we've even if you think of like silk screening, a lot of times silk screen, when they lay down that ink, they'll lay down multiple different colors. That gets pretty complicated when you're talking about reproducing stuff on silk screen. Again, you're working with spot colors and sometimes process colors as well, CMYK. But a lot of times that's maybe 9 or 10 colors that they'll print a T-shirt for. So if you see some crazy like Harley Davidson T-shirt, sometimes those shirts are printing 3, 4 spot colors as well as a 4-color process. So there might be 8 colors on the press running.
Yeah.
So it can get complicated as we get into that print side of it.
But like the best way to probably put it, or there's maybe not the best, but the spot colors are a lot closer to going to the home improvement store and having them mix a paint, and that paint is what you put on the wall, right? Exactly. It's the same thing. Whereas like the process ones, it's a little bit more like finer detail, almost like pointillism, and
it'd be like what you'd send to your color printer at home, or a inkjet printer or something like that. Yeah, that's probably a good scenario. People have to buy, magenta, yellow, cyan, black when they use their inkjet printers at home. Kind of those.
They got one of those really fancy photo ones that have like the
9
all
colors,
the
those are ridiculous.
Yeah,
look great though.
They do. They look amazing.
So getting back to that ink side of things, just be wary of how you're reproducing things, and kind of like you said before, go into it with that understanding before you start the project. Now, when you're talking about logo files, I think we talked about there's the digital side, the print side. I'll just make a generalization here about what you could for each of those. So we've got digital side, that's going to be JPEGs, PNGs, sometimes.
I'm opinionated on the website of things that like you should never use a JPEG version of your logo.
Yes. Maybe an SVG.
SVGs, PNGs, and stuff like that. JPEGs are meant for photos. Like saving something out that's got limited colors as a JPEG, you're going to get a lot of fuzzy areas and everything like that. So like if you're dealing with minimal colors, the best thing in my mind is to use the vector kind of formats, right? Because they're scale to a bunch of different things that are a lot more flexible. On the web, they're a lot smaller sizes. It doesn't like, you could have your whole screen be the logo. I don't know why you'd want to do that, but you could, and it's the same file size as if you were going to have it super small. So you have a lot of flexibility with the vector layout. So that would be a SVG file.
SVG for the web. Okay.
Yeah. And then pings are great if you want, if you need that transparency in there, and you have those limited colors, you can really optimize it. Because really on the web, we're talking a lot about trying to have the highest fidelity with the lowest file size. And that's super important. And so whereas that isn't a concern on the print side of things, we want the best resolution, and we don't care if the file sizes get really big, because it really doesn't matter. But on the web, every little K that you can shave off of something matters for the end user. So we always want to be really selective on what we're doing with those file sizes.
Which is the exact opposite of printing.
Yep, exactly.
Printing, you want to include as many of those Ks as possible.
Yep.
That's kilobytes. That's file size. That means if you've got a photo that's 5 megs and you've got a photo that's 15 megs, use the one that's 15 megs for print. For print, I should say.
Yeah.
So that's where it does get very different. So when you're delivering print projects, it's AI files, which are Illustrator files. It's InDesign files. It's PDFs, high resolution, the highest quality PDF files that you can use. Those can work as well. EPS files are pretty consistent. TIFF files, if it's just a photograph, sometimes a TIFF will have more data inside of it as an image file than a JPEG for sure. There's a lot of compression that happens in imagery.
That's what I was kind of get at. All those file formats you're talking about don't really inherently have any kind of compression applied to them, right?
Yep.
Whereas the web formats, PNGs, JPEGs, WebP is a newer standard out there. Those inherently do have a lot of compression, and you can almost every tool you use there's a quality thing in what you're choosing, and they may describe it as quality, like low quality, high quality, but there's also a thing that says lowest file size, highest file size, right? So they're making it very clear that that's the range you're trying to deal with and everything. So compression is a huge part of it.
Yeah, compression. You want no compression on anything that's going to a printer for sure. Yeah.
Because compression in a lot of cases will show artifacts of that compression, especially JPEGs.
Yeah. So our hope here is that we can kind of provide everybody with a good, solid, foundational understanding of a little bit about print, a little bit about digital, and the correct files that you might want to use for those, because it can be pretty frustrating if you feel like you're finished with a project and you deliver a certain file to a vendor or a printer, and it's not, then you got to go back and redo it. And sometimes when we're working on some of these projects, taking a file that was a image on the web, turning it into something that we can print at high quality at the right size, that sometimes takes an extra level of process. But then the next one would be, let's say you want to take that and you want to make a silkscreen version of that 5-color logo or image. That then is a whole other complicated process that's even more challenging and takes a lot more time. So that's why you really want to start off with whatever is that highest effort file size for your final product. Start there and then work your way down. You can always diminish or decrease the quality or the fidelity of whatever that file is and then deliver that later, but always try to start with that more complicated version. And hopefully you can deliver the right file at the right time to the right vendor and get it looking right out of the box.
So should we start working on trying to assemble an angry mob of torch bearers and pitchforks and everything against sending small photos in a Word doc and calling it done? Anytime
we can gather a mob, I'm all for it.
Yeah.
Yeah, especially around that concept.
So let's say I don't know what I'm doing, which is often the case, but I don't know what I'm doing. I send you this ping and I'm like, hey, it's our logo from the website. I just dragged it off the website and I sent it to you. I'm like, hey, can you get this put on some t-shirts?
And immediately strike back and say no.
Yeah.
No way in heck.
No way in hell. But like, hey, this is all I got.
Yep.
I mean, what do you do in that case? Like I do know. That's a tough challenge right there.
Okay, there's a couple of hacks that I've used in the past.
Okay.
First hack is, of course, reach out to their brand cop or their brand person who might be, somewhere else or in a different office or something that has some sort of a brand standard or some sort of a master guide. When they had their logo developed or designed, they got it from that designer and they've got an original file.
That's the first step almost every time, right? You get a crafty file that came from a better parent, so to speak.
Yes.
Try and find that parent.
Try to find the parents. Exactly.
Yeah. It's like a lost child.
I have used hacks before, though, where I've been out of time, and especially for logo files, something that I'll do is I'll go back into their website
Yep.
And they may have some downloadable files and resources,
Yep.
maybe as an ebook or maybe as a brochure or something that you can download. Download that PDF. You can open up that PDF in other higher end graphics programs.
Yep. Pull it out of there.
And pull it out from there. So like a vector logo is a perfect example. You could open up the annual report maybe. And on the cover is the logo usually.
Yeah.
And so you can just open that up in Illustrator, grab that vector file, save it out as a logo. Now that's maybe higher level hack job on that.
I've got an even higher one that I've used before. Like if the web developers did a good job in trying to send the best thing, sometimes that their logo, like in that top left corner of their website or something like that, is in an SVG format. If you can download that SVG file, at least it's vector and you can scale it up.
And then you're going to have to be in Illustrator, probably working.
Yeah,
on the
or
logo.
I mean, I think you could probably do it in Canva too. Like take that, Canva will take those SVG files and you can probably mess with it that way. Yeah, but but I mean, I've had instances where somebody sends us something. It's a partner's logo and the partner's too busy to care. We've both spent time redrawing logos, haven't we?
That's another option. You can hire somebody to do it. And I know that there's probably online platforms that you can send stuff to and get stuff digitized or drawn in Illustrator. I know Illustrator will do that. And I say Illustrator because that's the main program that creates vector files.
Yeah.
So vector is scalable infinitely. You don't have to worry about anything about resolution, but the image level that you get is you can't really get like photographic quality out of it. It's more for graphics and hard-edged shapes and things like that. So that is a difficult thing to get low quality and not really be able to find the parent or the highest quality, fidelity, whatever you're looking for on that. And
it can be maddening. Yeah. Really maddening.
It can stop projects dead in their tracks, really.
Yeah.
I mean, it depends too. I mean, worst case scenario, photos might be a little bit more forgiving because they can be scaled up and they might be a little bit blurry and not sharp. I argue that reflects on the quality of your brand a little bit because you're not using optimal, it just kind of shows you don't really care that much.
Mm-hmm.
But that said, if you're making a billboard, it's shocking when you think the scale of a billboard, but the fact that you're so far away from a billboard, you don't really need a lot of resolution. I think most billboards that I've done are 1,400 pixels wide, which when you think about it, you're like, wait, it's 40 feet long, but it's so far away that that's
so far away,
irrelevant. Yeah. Same with large event graphics and things like that.
Yeah.
But worst case scenario, you just have to run with what you got. And then, if nobody cares enough to give you the right stuff, then it's going to reflect. And that's unfortunate. You can try to do as many hacks as possible to try to make it work. But you're kind of back up against the wall, I would say.
Any other tips for preventing the file ping pong?
Really try to understand what the end result is. Think of the end first. What's the end game? And produce towards that as much as possible for your final finished piece if you can. You're always working in the highest fidelity file for your final process, but to get those comments, feedbacks, round of revisions, use PDFs, use low resolution, use small file size stuff that doesn't eat up email. Try to stick to the 5 megabyte email rule.
You can only control what you can control, right? So that's checking things, trying to be along the way, if like the inputs that you get, making sure that you can check those things for quality early on and get it back. You can't control. Maybe you could provide a little bit of guidance to people who are sending you things to help prevent some of that ping pong. But if you can work on your side to make sure that things are correct, you can make sure that you're not causing somebody else to volley it back to you.
If you have to print something and it's start with the printer, start with the final. A lot of times if it's event graphics or banners or pull-ups or stuff like that, there's usually a spec sheet that the producer will send to you. And you can always send that, ask for that right up front so you're working in that size immediately and you never have to scale it up. Scaling things up reduces quality every time. So.
Well, I'm clear.
Oh, good.
Yeah. How about you?
You'll never send me the wrong file again.
I can't make that promise.
Oh, okay.
I'll try.
All right. I'll try to do the same, Mike.
Awesome. Thanks, man. Yeah. See ya.
Thanks for tuning in. For more information and other episodes, subscribe to the Marketing Team of One podcast on YouTube, Apple, or Spotify podcast networks. You can also chat with us on the r/Marketing Team of One subreddit or visit marketingteamofone.com to learn more.